Hi, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live and in living color on the Sudds-R-Us podcast. This is episode number 37, and today we are discussing Thanksgiving, the truth about Thanksgiving and African American traditions. So, y'all ready for it? Y'all ready for it? This is going to be mind blowing. We hope that you are enlightened. It certainly enlightened us. So, we are going to start off, first of all, with our shout outs to the Sudds-R-Us podcast, of course, but also to the BS3 network. We are now a network on Roku TV. So if you have not downloaded BS3 Network, please do so. There is a plethora of shows that you will be entertained by that include sports, music, life, comedy, social culture, relationships, movie reviews. That's a tongue twister. But we are all distributed under the BS3 network. And of course, you can always view us on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, IG, Twitter, you name it. We are there. So if you are interested in the BS3 network and you would like some coaching, he offers coaching, and that information is scrolling on your screen. Please reach out to him. He is very transparent, very down to earth, and relatable. That if you are interested in joining this team of podcasters, we encourage you to reach out to him. And again, if you would like to reach out to us at the Sudds-R-Us podcast, you can do so at the Gmail address of scrolling on your screen. We welcome your comments, your questions, possible topics, even your reviews. We welcome it all. So send us an email, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. So stay tuned once again for the truth about Thanksgiving.
All right, all right. Thanksgiving. We're going to look at the origin versus tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the origin is really a bloody one, my brothers and sisters. And some people say it's time to cancel the holiday.
Wow.
Thanksgiving in the United States of America is traditionally a time for family, fun, football, and food.
Right.
Maybe not in that order.
Right.
But American school children typically learn that the tradition dates back to the Pilgrims, who helped establish the Plymouth colony in 1620, Massachusetts. Now, as the American Thanksgiving mythology goes, Pilgrims and Native Americans united 400 years ago for a celebration feast in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Wow.
The friendly local Native Americans swooped in to teach the struggling colonists how to survive in the new world. Then everyone got together to celebrate with a feast in 1621. But peace didn't last between the English settlers and their one-time Wampanoags allies. And the two were at war just a generation later.
My goodness.
Thanksgiving 2021 will mark the 400th year anniversary of the first American Thanksgiving.
Wow.
The holiday is a reminder of some of the systemic racism and oppression Native Americans experience in the United States. That's why we're compelled to talk about the truth on this Saturday before Thanksgiving Thursday.
Right.
In reality, my brothers and sisters, Thanksgiving Day feast predate Plymouth. And the peace celebration that day was tenuous. The real story behind the holiday is so dark, in fact, that some people are rethinking how they celebrate the holiday.
Wow.
And whether they should celebrate it at all. The Plymouth Thanksgiving of 1621 wasn't the first. Settlers in Berkeley Hundred in Virginia celebrated their arrival with an annual Thanksgiving back in 1619, according to the National Geographic. Though the Washingtonian reported the meal was probably a little more than some oysters and some ham thrown together.
Wow.
Now, the oysters I don't mind, but throwing ham together, that may be a problem with me. But decades before that, Spanish settlers and members of the Silo tribe broke bread in Florida with some salted pork, garbanzo beans, and a mass in 1565, according to the National Park Service. Now, our modern definition of Thanksgiving revolves around eating turkey.
Right.
But this was more of an occasion for religious observance in past centuries. The Pilgrims would likely consider their sober 1623 day of prayer the first actual Thanksgiving. This is per the History of the Massachusetts blog. But others pinpoint 1637 as the true origin of Thanksgiving. Now watch this now. This is the true origin of Thanksgiving. This is what they consider the true origin of Thanksgiving. Since the Massachusetts Colony General, John Winthrop declared a day to celebrate colonial soldiers who had just slaughtered hundreds of Pequot men, women, and children in what is now Mystic, Connecticut, which leads to the true story regarding Thanksgiving. In 1621, though the Pilgrims celebrated a feast, it was not repeated in the years to follow. In 1636, a murdered white man was found in his boat, and the Pequot tribe were blamed.
Interesting.
Now,
sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar. Now, in retaliation, settlers burned Pequot villages, killing and burning hundreds of men, women, and children. Now, this as my wife just said, does that narrative sound familiar regarding the African American history?
Yes.
This date in Native history, on May 26, 1637, a Puritan force fortified by Native allies massacred a Pequot fort in Connecticut, killing as many as 500 Native Americans. Now, this pre-dawn attack on Mystic Fort marked the first time that Pequot was defeated, said Kevin McBride, an anthropology professor at the University of Connecticut and director of research at the Massachusetts Pequot Museum and Research Center. By the early 17th century, the Pequots had approximately 8,000 members living in a 250 square mile radius in southeastern Connecticut, residing in 15 to 20 separate villages. And the first major conflict between colonists and North American natives in New England was with the Pequot tribe. And the Pequot War in 1636 to 1638 between colonists over the tribe's traditional land influenced them to join with the Mohegans and eventually became the Massachusetts Western Pequots. Now, it wasn't until 1970 that tribal members began to come back to the original tribal lands. Thriving due to monetary support, the Pequot tribe. The Massantucket Pequot Museum is one of the most profoundly amazing Native American museums in the world, with hundreds of exhibits and a full-scale Pequot village. The museum is a must-see for anyone traveling to Mystic, Connecticut. Now, for the first 8 months of the Pequot War, the Pequot never lost a battle to the English. McBride said that tactically, the Pequots were more superior, even without firearms. The warriors were expert, born arrow shooters and spear throwers. And the English could not figure out their tactics. Up to that mystic massacre, the Pequot had won every engagement. So the English, they had to do a sneak attack early in the morning when the Pequots were sleeping in order to defeat them. In response to the arrival of the Dutch in 1611, the Pequot tribe built a confederacy of dozens of tribes to control the fur trade and strengthen the political and economic power. Until the English arrived in 1630, the Dutch and the Pequot controlled the region's fur trade. Now, with the addition of the English traders and settlers, the power balance shifted. The Pequot War broke out because the English wanted to take over and dominate the fur trade because they saw how lucrative of a business this was.
Following the money.
Now, does that narrative sound familiar?
So
regarding
familiar.
our African-American history.
I tell you.
In the following months, the English massacred 2 more Pequot villages out of greed, bigotry, hatred, and racism. But the history books, they will have us to believe that the tribal chiefs conspired with the Europeans to give up the territory for safety.
Right.
Just like they claimed happened in Africa during the slave trade.
See what we've been taught, y'all? I tell you.
But on June the 5th,
the truth will set you free.
Yes, it will. And July 28th, most of the surviving Pequot were sold into slavery or escaped to join other southern New England tribes. But the Pequots will eventually return and once again became one of the most powerful tribes in America. In the 1970s, more than 300 years after the Pequot War, tribal members began moving back to the area to restore their land base and community.
Reclaim it.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. And in the early 1980s, the tribe was granted federal recognition, and shortly afterwards, it launched the first phase of Foxwoods Resorts Casino, the second largest casino in the country. Now, it began with a high-stakes bingo operation in 1986. It evolved 7 years later into the biggest, wealthiest, glitziest gaming facility in the country. The nation's rags to riches story was reflected in an early marketing slogan, "The wonder of it all," earning billions plus a year in revenue. Wow. Foxwood has poured more than $3.7 billion into state coffers since operating. Look at God.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
The strong will survive.
They will.
Now, just on a side note, we supported the Yachu Diha Wintong Nation at the Cash Creek Casino Resort.
Cash Creek, yeah.
In Brooks, California. If y'all know what we mean.
Lost all our money too. Didn't win a dime, but anyway.
With the assistance of Native American rights funds and the Indian Rights Association, the tribe filed suit in 1976 against the neighboring landowners. In the state of Connecticut, that land had been illegally obtained in 1856. Their efforts were rewarded, and their reservation lands now total 1,250 acres.
Wow.
In connection to their land claims, the Pequots also received support from the state of Connecticut. Due to their efforts, Connecticut legislators unanimously passed legislation to petition the federal government to grant federal recognition to the tribe. And in 1983, the Massanutten Pequot Indian Land Claims Settlement Act was enacted by the U.S. Congress and signed by President Reagan on October the 18th.
Wow.
In a double punch, the act granted the tribe federal recognition, enabling it to repurchase and place in trust their land. So that's the Pequot story. Now, another story is the so-called peace didn't last in Plymouth either. Massasoit, the Wampanoag paramount chief, allied with English settlers after Plymouth was established and fought with the newcomers against the French and other local tribes. But the alliance became strained over time as thousands more English colonists moved to Plymouth, taking over more land. Authorities asserted control over most aspects of the Wampanoag life, according to historic contacts in the Indian people and the colonists in today's northeastern United States.
Wow.
A study published in the Journey Quaternary Science Review estimated that disease reduced the New England indigenous population by 90% by the early 1600s.
Wow.
They continue to die from what the colonists called Indian fever. The so-called disease was brought over to North America by the English.
Interesting.
So our question is, was it by accident or on purpose to kill the Native Americans?
Wow.
Now, the arrival of the Europeans in the Americans in 1492 marked the onset, of this disease epidemic, resulting in the loss of the majority of the indigenous people living in America over the subsequent century. The Native American land use was widespread before Europeans arrived. Thus, the great dying of the Native American people of America. Now, according to scientists, the uptake of carbon on the abandoned anthropogenic lands after the European contact may have been large enough to impact the atmospheric CO2. Or maybe the dirty, unclean, contaminated, virus transporting Europeans brought the disease with them. Because the truth of the matter, my brothers and sisters, is that the history tells us that England sent the lowest of the lowest scumbags to America. Wow. They're convicts, they're cutthroats, they're psychological deranged. And the Native Americans had all natural diets with healthy herbal lifestyles. So they didn't allow or have the opportunity to build up a natural immunization from the diseases and viruses that the Europeans brought over to America.
Wow.
But by the time Massasoit's son, Meccacomet, known to the English as King Philip, inherited leadership, relations had frayed, his men were executed for the murder of a Punkampaag interpreter, and Christian convert, John Sansamon, sparking the King Philip's War. Wampanoag warriors responded with raids, and the New England Confederation of Colonies declared war in 1675. This war was bloody and devastating as well. And the article is published in the Historical Journal of Massachusetts. Montclair State University professor Robert E. Cray said that death toll could have been up to 30% of English population and half of the Native Americans in New England. Metacomet was beheaded and dismembered, according to its happening in Rhode Island. And the colonists impaled his head on a spike and displayed it for 25 years. The war was just one of the series of brutal but dimly remembered early conflicts between Native Americans and colonists in the New England, New York, and Virginia areas. So this holiday that we're about to approach has a dark past. And some people are rethinking Thanksgiving. And a recently renewed focus on racial justice in the United States has some people saying it's time to reevaluate the meaning and celebration of Thanksgiving. Teachers and professors and Native Americans told the New York Times that they are rethinking the holiday that has marginalized the U.S. violence and cruelty between Native Americans, giving it names like Takesgiving and Thanksgiving Massacre. And reflections on Thanksgiving are now new, according to the New York Post. The United American Indians of New England have been publicly mourning Thanksgiving for decades. Frank James, an Inquina Wampanoag activist who helped establish the National Day of Mourning in 1970, called the Wampanoag welcoming of English settlers perhaps our biggest mistake. He said it in the Washington Post. Our National Day of Mourning, Native Americans gather in Plymouth, Massachusetts for a day of remembrance. Prayers and speeches take place, accompanied by beating of drums before participating in a march through the Plymouth Historic District. Participants in the National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors and the struggle of Native people to survive today. The commemorating plaque reads in part, "It is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience in this country."
Wow. As we are enlightened with, the truths about the history of the United States, we are obligated to share that information. We always knew that it was something, more peculiar about Thanksgiving than what we were taught in school. But we never really knew what the truth was. So we're grateful to have this topic presented on today. But as African Americans, we have that tradition of Thanksgiving. But before I go further, we want to just recognize our guest, our son. Good afternoon. And he also says, love the color scheme. You know how we rock it now. And then the truth is deep. Exactly. And to the Langstons, thank you so much for watching. That is true. The truth is deep. And again, we've got to share. We've got to share it. But Thanksgiving for us as African Americans is not just confined to November.
Right.
Every day is a day of Thanksgiving. I mean, that's a song. Every day is a day of Thanksgiving. And God forbid if we just give thanks to God in November, when the Lord has been good to us all throughout the year. He's been faithful, kind, and true. every day, all day long. So as African Americans, we begin each day with giving thanks to God, for the new day. And however you add on to that prayer, we always begin with thanks because he didn't have to do it. And the Bible says also to pray without ceasing. Right. And that's exactly what we do as African Americans. I know my family does. When we're waking up, when we're walking, we're talking, we're sitting, we're standing, we're at work, when we're trying to make some major decisions, even when we're driving. Yes. And in this Atlanta metro area, you better be praying. So, yeah, we definitely acknowledge, the blessings of God. So having that grateful and thankful heart is not foreign to us, because that's what we were always taught. And again, not only during Thanksgiving, but also throughout the year. But when that last quarter of the year rolls around, when it rolls around, we're excited about that time of the year. From, years back, we've celebrated and gave it our own twist as far as Thanksgiving is concerned. It is a time to spend with family and friends. And that's what we love, and the loved ones. It's time to just throw down in the kitchen. That's been our tradition. And I cherish that tradition. It's not that we've adopted anything else. It's something that we've made of our own as African Americans. We pull out those big stock pots, and then we fill the house with the aroma of soul food cooking. We start, preparing our grocery list. I remember my mother, starting that grocery list early on, and I'm not talking about the Wednesday or the week of, she would start buying up the food that she was preparing, even down to her fresh vegetables, if she had to buy some and freeze them because she was planning on making this huge dinner. To her chitlins, yes, she would make the chitlins. She buy them red buckets, I was not a partaker of chitlins in my younger years, so I didn't get into that. But the dried and the canned goods, she would ensure, she thought the store was going to run out, and maybe they would, but my mother was just, habitual about that, made sure that she had her items on hand in advance. And even, as years went by, when the foil pans became, a commodity, because who wanted to eat all that food and then have to wash all the dishes, so we wanted to just have time after dinner to let that food digest. And, some folk would take a nap because they had too many biscuits or the cornbread, and then, watch some more football and just enjoy company and the dessert and whatever else was to be partaken of. But the meal planning, I enjoy that part about it, and just, deciding on what we were going to have for Thanksgiving. And so we would start, prepping our meats and getting them thawed, and, cleaning the vegetables, the greens, the green beans, whatever was going to be prepared, and have those pots and pans. They would be humming. But the love that we would put into the food for the sake of our family and our loved ones. And then we would declare that the kitchen would be closed the day after Thanksgiving, because we would be so tired. We wear ourselves out, but it was just a blessing. And, I reflect back on my grandmother, and our rich family traditions. Unfortunately, they're slowly disappearing. Women, either they don't know how to cook or they just don't want to cook, It's sad, but people just don't cook anymore. They rather eat out. And to be honest, you don't know what's going on behind the counter, and God forbid in that kitchen. They're not as clean as you think they are. And where is the best place to eat than in your own kitchen, where you prepared the food that has been prepared to the utmost perfection, I should say. But before dinner, that's another tradition of ours that we even uphold, that was passed down for years, is that we watch the Thanksgiving Day parade, with our children or with our grandchildren. and pop the popcorn. My husband has gourmet popcorn that he prepares, y'all, with an air popper that we blow out one every year. We got to buy another one every year, and then we watch football. I love football, and so we would enjoy football all day, eat and enjoy football. But from the time that I grew up, and even as a parent, you know, I remember my grandmother, you know, she'd have 2 and 3 meats, you know, turkey, ham, chitlins, and then, you know, 5 vegetables. She was big on the vegetables, greens and green beans and corn, yams, and, you know, coleslaw. You got to have that coleslaw for the chitlins, they tell me. But for the starches, you know, she would have the dressing, the rice and gravy, the potato salad, the macaroni and cheese. We always had to have some dried beans, usually pinto beans. My God, you know, my mouth is watering. Then she would top it off with those yeast rolls. I remember her setting them on top of the refrigerator, and so they could rise, you know, the higher. She'd say, you got to put them up high, you know, so that they would rise. And the cornbread, I never have mastered that. But then 2 and 3 desserts, you know, the sweet potato pies. My mother make this 6-layer orange supreme cake. I mean, it'd take her all day. That was an all-day event for her. And then, of course, the pound cake with the caramel icing. And then we wash it down. Now, y'all remember, we always had that red Kool-Aid. Red Kool-Aid. My mother used to have this gourmet Kool-Aid, but she'd have grape Kool-Aid with some RC cola in it. Boy, that was delicious. And then, of course, some sweet tea, you know, with that liquid diabetes. My God, my mouth is just watering now. I'm just anxious about, you know, getting in that kitchen. But when my mother would cook these huge dinners, and I'm sure families can remember, because it'd be a family gathering and it would just be so many people. I mean, folk could eat, you know, 2 and 3 plates. And then, you know what I'm going to say, they want to take plates home, right? So we eventually had to set rules, because my mother would literally be in the kitchen all week preparing. And so we would have to tell people, you know, you can't take leftovers. There is no to-go plates today. You know, they would come with their Tupperware. They'd be so bold about it, you know. But we had to put a rule on that, because my mother would literally not have any leftovers for the next day. And so especially the non-contributors, okay, those that would eat 2 plates and then have 5 to-go plates in the trunk before everybody else even had a chance to eat. So, you know, we got to do better, y'all. I mean, if you're going to bring something and contribute. But we always had another rule: if you can't cook, and that's okay, if you can't cook, be honest. You bring the plates and the cutlery and the drinks, the napkins, you know, the ice. Don't try to cook if you can't cook now, because you will be talked about in the African American family, okay? Or if you're a guest, you know, you will be talked about. So if you bring in something, you better bring it, and it better taste good. Taste it before you bring it. But as we got older, you know, and the group got larger, we tried circulating, you know, let's have a potluck, you know. I don't know. It's something about potlucks that don't always set well with me. So it's selective for me. Okay. I'm always asking, what did you make? The cooks, you know, the real cooks, what did you make? And then I'm going to be selective of what I eat. But to be safe, like I said, you know, I would make a family dinner at home just to make sure that my family had some good eats, either that night if we were just skimping on the meal, or we come home and eat it the next day. But again, you know, if you really can't throw down, you know, you bypass on bringing your favorite dish that you think tastes good. So for many of you that don't know, as I recover from this knee surgery, you know, yes, I had another one and I feel so much better. But I'm scaling back this year. You know, our dinner is going to include tradition, but it's not going to be all of that tradition, and that's okay. Because I know what my limits are. But I must add that our daughter Camelia is going to do a vegan option this year. But like I said, I'm preparing our dinner, and then I'll see what that vegan option tastes like. But our tradition has been lately the Cornish hens, which I love. They're smaller, they're they're more delicate piece of meat. And it's really not, this huge turkey that you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with all these leftovers. And of course, the dressing, I make that with the cornbread, and of course my special seasonings, and of course candied yams. And this year I'm going to do the green beans and the corn mixture. Okay. Instead of greens. We've been eating a lot of greens and spinach, which I love. And then, of course, the macaroni and cheese that the grandkids just rave over. And our son, I got you the next time we come visit, Trey. And then, some biscuits, some cornbread, and I'm going to do a 7-Up cake. That's what my husband has requested. And when your husband requests something, then you shown up. I was going to do a cobbler, but he asked for a 7-Up cake. So that's what I'm going to do. And of course, the leftovers, whatever that may be, y'all please eat them before the week is out. If you haven't heard this comedian, he says by day 6, you in the hospital, and day 7, you dead. So you don't want to play around with them leftovers. It's not quite that serious, but during this pandemic, we think about how we can't get together with our family and friends. It's unfortunate, but it's really not that unfortunate when you think of all of the technology that's at our hands. We can Zoom and greet family members. I think last year we had maybe about 30 people on our Zoom, 30 family members. Family members, believe it or not, we had not even met. So it was such a blessing last year to spend that time with family. And it's not like you gotta, spend hours and hours. It is, a day where you're gonna be trying to eat and cook and do whatever. But something to consider, to get on that Zoom. Schedule it early, so that families can get on there with you. But there's one pet peeve that I'm gonna mention. And y'all can, talk about me later, but it's okay. All right. On Thanksgiving on social media, you see 900 posts of the same plate of food. I'm not doing it this year. I'm not taking a picture of the table, the decorations, the plate, the food, nothing. It's all the same thing. 500 plates for the same thing. Gosh, that just really gets on my nerves. But lastly, we focus on Thanksgiving as a time to give thanks, not so much of the paganism, not the pilgrims, not the, the original, the Indians or the indigenous people, whatever, but to give thanks. And to be honest, when we get around the table, everybody needs to acknowledge what they give thanks for. That's one of our traditions here in the Sudderth household. And to hear, what everyone is thankful for is it's such a blessing, because we do take things for granted. If you haven't looked at that episode, take a look at that episode, the things we take for granted. But before we came on, we were thinking, recently that we normally see, people go big on Halloween. Now that's one holiday, if you will. It's not really a holiday for us. We refuse to celebrate, but they go big in our neighborhood, and then they skip right over Thanksgiving, and then they go straight to Christmas, just like the merchants, because it's got that money value to it. They skip right over it, and it is because of the money that they intend to receive. But if we really take the focus off of that paganism and all the money that we're going to spend that we don't have, then we put the real focus on where it is, and that's on Jesus Christ. So as we advance into this Thanksgiving season, just remember that we're blessed. There's a saying, grateful, thankful, and blessed, and that's who we are. So we're grateful. One last thing that we normally do, and that's our tradition as we follow through on Thanksgiving, we put up our Christmas tree right after Thanksgiving. Call of paganism, if you will. It's our tradition. We know what the real meaning is. And so we celebrate with our children, with our grandchildren. And so it's just what we do, and we appreciate it. The last quarter of the year, we really do. So thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We're going to go back through a few of our comments here. Marshall, thank you so much for tuning in. Cousin says, yes, big football day. And don't try it. I know what you're saying, Marshall. People come with no contribution, but they want to definitely take all the food with them. And yes, it is shameful. It is shameful.
All right. Thank you. Well, we just wanted to share with you not only the tradition, but also the origin. And we have some comment regarding the origin as far as the Pilgrims. Like I mentioned, they cut off that chief's head. Well, that's one of the other traditions for them, is playing soccer with one of the natives' head. And also we talked about in the beginning how a lot of people are thinking about not celebrating Thanksgiving. And because of that, it's the day of prayer, but also it's a day of remembering our ancestors. So we wanted to give the origin because a lot of us have Native American blood running through our veins. And when you look at the tradition compared to the origin, we have to reflect. And like I shared with my wife yesterday, even though we celebrate Christmas because as Christians, we consider that the birth of Christ, but we don't put the tree up until the day after Thanksgiving. So basically, unaware what we were doing, we were not trying to skip over that day of giving thanks, just to jump straight to Christmas. Where some people put up Christmas decorations, like Irene said, right after Halloween. Well, we just thank God for this opportunity to share with you the origin as well as the traditions. And we're going to close out with a scripture as always. And it will be coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 24 through 26. And this is from the New Living Translation. It says, don't be concerned for your own good, but for the good of others. So you may eat any meat that is sold in the marketplace without raising questions of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and everything in it.
That's it.
May God bless you and keep you and your family in this holiday season. And we pray that all goes well with you and continue to celebrate life and be thankful for all the blessings that God has bestowed upon us. God bless you.
Yes, God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.